Hey guys, just curious how much action you got on the pick at 13, and what led you to make the decision to just do the one thing there, and with Kinlaw being the guy, how much was he one of your six guys that you mentioned the other day, John?
Uh, the answer to the latter part of that is yes. Kinlaw was one of those guys. Um, he was actually the first guy on our list that we would have taken at 13. In response to how much action, I think we did a lot more, and I think the entire league did before the draft because of the potential hitches that could go on with the virtual drafting. And so there was a lot of calling before the draft in the days leading up, and then during that. So we had a lot of different things going. I think the Tampa thing came about while we were in that pick. And we felt like there was a good chance that Kinlaw would be there. If not, a couple of the other players that we really liked at kind of that 13 slot would be there. So we felt comfortable getting back one spot, gaining a fourth-round pick, and had a good idea that Javon would still be there. And he's a guy that we had zeroed in on for a while. You go back to, when we first built this thing and Kyle and I came together, one of the things that we really believed in is that's an equalizer in a football league where everything's set up for offenses to be successful. One of the ways you can equalize the equation is by to get after and knock down the passer. We've built a pretty good unit there, and we wanted to keep that strong, and we felt he was a great fit for that.
Kyle, this is Chris Biederman of the Sacramento Bee. Just curious about your thoughts on Brandon Aiyuk, given that he didn't have, he was only a one-year starter, so pretty limited sample. But assuming with him it's about the physical traits that you covet, and could you explain what those traits are that you saw in him?
When I start with receivers, I really don't know much of their history. I don't know much of their stats. I just get a list from our scouts and John's whole team of guys they've been studying for a few years, and they give you all the guys they think are going to be eligible towards the top. And Aiyuk was up there in those top six guys, and I think 5 went today, if I'm not mistaken, and there's going to be a couple more that probably go tomorrow in the first 10. So there's a good group, but when I just watching them all and not knowing where they're going to go at all. I loved Aiyuk, and the first time, not knowing anything about him, I don't know a lot about college football until I get into these guys, and to see him just, they didn't do everything in their offense, but he has on tape that he can run every single route, and he can do it outside the numbers, and he can do it inside the numbers, and he has a certain skill set where I think it's similar to Dante's in terms of you want to just peg him at one position. He can do all three. He can play the X, he can play the Z, he can play the F. He's got the speed to get on top. He's got the quickness to play in the slot. He's got the toughness to go over the middle. And the guy is just completely committed to me into being as good as God ever intended him to be. And I know he only has a real stats on 1 year. He went to junior college. He had N'Keal Harry there last year. So there's a lot of things that go into that is why he probably wasn't considered to go before 13 for most people. But just watching him, the guys, what he's put on tape this year at Arizona State and getting to meet the person, everything he did there, he was more than a viable option at 13. And the fact that we were able to get him late, I feel very fortunate and very happy for the Niners today.
Hey guys, it's Matt Barrows. You currently don't have any second-day picks. Are you optimistic that you could end up with some? And where do things stand on trades? Obviously, specifically Marquise Goodwin.
Yeah, in response to Marquise, that's we're talking with a few teams, and we'll see where that goes tomorrow. Kyle just spoke to the strength of this receiver class, and I think that's you talk about the many variables holding things up, and I think that's given people pause, but people see the value in what Marquise brings. He's an extremely talented player who's a game changer in terms of what he does to defenses. So there is interest out there. See where that goes. We're trying to find a good home for him. As for getting into the second round, we've emptied the tank a little there today, but Kyle just alluded to the fact that, why we did. I think we never thought there would be a scenario where we could grab Kinlaw, eventually at 14, and then still have an opportunity to get one of those 6 guys I talked about the other day. And for us at 13, he was probably the 3rd guy on our list. And so when he kept coming back there, we said we ought to start looking to get up. And fortunately, Rick Spielman answered the call, and we were able to work something out.
Guys, this is Matt Mayoko. At what point, John, did you realize that you couldn't sit at 31 and get the guy you wanted? Was it during that run of wide receivers, or was the plan to go up all along?
Well, in both these situations, I want to give a lot of credit. I think this year, probably more than ever, you got to trust a couple things. That's your film, your scouts, your coaches. Kyle will talk about how prepared our coaches were this year. Our scouts were unbelievable. But, Will Muschamp is a guy that I really grew to know last year in the process with Deebo Samuel. But one thing Kyle and I talked to him, I think we talked to him a couple days before the draft. We both just struck, I think a couple months later, how accurately he just depicted exactly who Deebo was, both in his strengths and the limited weaknesses that he had. He was extremely honest. So Will was tremendous. I talked to his, junior college coach, with Javon, and then, John Scott, their defensive line coach, is a guy, some of our guys had relationships. So all those guys were huge. With Aiyuk, Herm Edwards is one of my best friends in life. He was one of my coaches. And so Herm was a tremendous guy to lean on. There was talk throughout, the league that Aiyuk was one of the guys getting hot. And I think that's just because people started just watching the film. And albeit, the 1-year starter, what he put on film was extremely impressive. And, we decided to pounce, and we gave up a lot for it, but and we sure hope it's worth it. But he's a guy we value tremendously.
Hey, Matt, and just for everyone, because this draft was so hard. And I mean, no one ever wants to be in a situation where they don't have a 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round pick. So why are we in that situation? And we decided last year going into the draft, like we thought we could get Bosa, and we were like, man, how nice would it be to have someone else on the other side of Bosa? And we spent a 2nd round pick to get D4 to that. And that's what it is this year. And if we feel like we didn't have D4, we wouldn't have been in the Super Bowl. So we're happy with that. And then halfway through the year, we had some injuries, some things weren't going exactly as planned at wideout. And we were 8-0 or 7-0, whatever it was. And we realized, man, we do have a chance to go to the Super Bowl. What are we going to need to do that? And we thought at the time we need to add a receiver. And that was Emmanuel Sanders. In order to get that done at that time, which we didn't plan on at that time, but we were 8-0 or 7-0. And so we realized it was Emmanuel. In order to do that, we got rid of a 3 and we swapped to 4 and 5. So that left us without a 2, 3, and 4. And that's not something you ever want to do, but I do believe those 2 things are what got us to the Super Bowl. I think it would have been, we were close, but it would have been very hard to get over the hump without those 2 guys. And that's what has us in this situation this year. And it was real tough to lose Defoe, like as hard as anything, not only with the player, but the guy. But Defoe gave us a chance to fix a little bit and to be able to regain some of that. And we got the 13th pick, and it would have been great. John and I talked, for the last few months, because of how little we have in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. If we could trade back a little bit and stuff and maybe pick up a 3rd player in the 3rd or 4th round, that would be our goal. But there's a few guys we can't pass at 13. And Kinlaw was one of those guys. And for Kinlaw to be there at 13 and us to go to 14 and still get him and pick up a 4th rounder, we thought was unbelievable. But Aiyuk was one of the guys we were going to do that for if Kinlaw wasn't there. And then to still be there, sitting there at 31, and a guy that we would have done it if we had to at 13 is sitting there when we're at 31, available at 25, and we feel very strongly from our intel over the last few months, there's no way Aiyuk's getting to 31. And if we could take our 4th round pick, which a 4th round pick on our team it's going to be hard to find a 4th round pick to beat out any of our guys to start. So to risk that, to go up and get a starting receiver with the starting 3 technique that we already got, it was something we didn't think was going to be there. And we just feel real happy it was. And we get what we don't have this year. And that's something John and I are going to work to never not be in again. But you know what? If those decisions that put us here helped us last year, we'll do that every time. And that's what we're happy about. But that's what we're trying to get out of too. And we added 2 guys here today that without a doubt are starting caliber players who will make your team better, who are going to be contributors on their first contracts for a long time. And that'll really help us in free agency next year. That'll really help us in the draft next year. And it'll really help the 2021 49ers. So that's what we're just pumped about, because it was tough. But that's what we had to do to get to the Super Bowl last year. And we feel we did as good as we could right now to redeem that. We're excited.
Hey guys, this is Eric Branch. If I could just ask 2 quick questions. One about Kinlaw. He is reportedly didn't participate at the combine because of knee tendonitis. You just speak to if there's any concern there. I'm sure he got checked out at the combine, but the way this offseason is structured, was it any different as far as getting medical on him? And then with Aiyuk, based on what you're saying, might he have been your top-rated wide receiver in this draft?
Okay. The first question, with Javon and his injury, at the Senior Bowl, first of all, I was down there at the Senior Bowl. He went and absolutely decimated folks down there, and then got out after a couple days. And apparently the knee did flare up. Our guys did an extensive as medical check as they could have. We got to the point where we were comfortable there, and we liked the player so much. It's a guy who missed, 1 game in college, and played at an incredibly high level. We just think he's a tremendous fit. The second part of your question, I'm forgetting already. Go.
Oh, as far as the injury, yeah. I mean, did it make it more difficult just the way this offseason is as far as getting more medical information, or did you have what you needed?
No, that was tough. So typically what happens, they do what they call a recheck for guys who had things at the combine. You're not able to do those rechecks, but what a lot of agents did was send their guys to independent doctors. Those doctors then distributed letters and their opinions. And so, then you leverage your medical staff and your doctors' relationships with those doctors. And we got to the point, Eric, where we were comfortable. And that's where we're at. As I think the second part of the question, what was the second part of the question?
Oh, yes. Sorry, it was a mouthful. Based on what you were saying, might Aiyuk have been your highest-rated wide receiver if he was a foundational Big Six?
Yeah, he was. He was.
Give this 6 comment, John. This is strong.
Yeah, 6 was from the press conference the other week. I want to keep him guessing.
He would have held me to something.
He was one of the 6, though.
Gotcha.
Hey, it's Tim Kawakami here. Kyle, you're obviously an offensive-minded guy. You've coached offense, and yet in 3 of your first 4 drafts here, you've taken a defensive lineman with your first pick. Is that, you look back on that as surprising to you, or is that when you were and John were first talking about this, with a team that's already invested a lot in the defensive line, were you thinking, okay, we're just going to keep going with defensive line, and how important is that to you when you build a team?
I'm always down to go defensive lineman if the right guy's there. And I was surprised Kinlaw was there, but I can promise you, ask my high school friends when we did Madden and we drafted our own guys, like this is back in 97 or whatever. My first pick was always Strahan and theirs was always like Randy Moss. I always wanted to do D-line, and I think that's what we've done here. And I think John feels the same way. Yes, John, why he was on one of the best defenses in the history of the NFL. Yeah, they had a Hall of Fame safety, a Hall of Fame corner, and Tiki, a linebacker, and Derek Brooks, but it was because of the D-line. And I think we both firmly believe that. And, I was on a team in Atlanta with, I think, possibly the best offense in the history of the NFL, or at least up there with a few of them. And it's still really tough to win if you don't have that D-line and you don't have that defense. And That's what our goal was to do here before we came here. And I think last year that really showed. And I can't tell you what it was like for an offensive coach that, yeah, I love calling plays and running an offense for a team that's more talented than everyone offensively. I mean, that's really fun. And I felt like that's where we were at in Atlanta. But, it's a lot easier to call offensive plays for. What we had weeks 1 through 8 last year, where our defense was 100% healthy and dominated everyone. And I felt like that was the easiest I've ever had to call a game offensively. And if we can keep our defense that way and still gradually build our offense, I mean, that was the goal of John and I talking before we got here. Now you got to make sure those guys are there because it's always bittersweet. I mean, you're right. I am an offensive coach, and all I want it's more fun for me on offense with offensive playmakers, but nothing's more fun than having a defense like we had last year. And I think that gives you the best chance to go to the Super Bowl. And I think that's why John has a Super Bowl ring. I think that's why a lot of people who've been on those top defenses do. And if we have that top defense, I think it's easier to manufacture it on offense, where not many people manufacture a defense. That defense better be more talented than almost everyone they're going against.
Kyle, is it safe to say Brandon was your top receiver on the board? And what hole, I guess, or what need do you see him filling in your offense among your receiver core?
Well, I think when we reached out for Emmanuel and made that trade, we just needed a consistent receiver who could do a little bit of everything. We didn't have to only put in on this play or that play, who was just a down in and down out receiver. It didn't matter where you put him, and it didn't matter what the play was. And that's what we got a little bit with Emmanuel when we traded for him. And that's what I think we're getting with Brandon. There's not something like, all right, if we use him this way, he'll be really good. I think Brandon would have been great whatever team he went to. And I'm so excited to have a guy like that because I think we can use him any way we want. And I think he's capable of doing everything from an athletic standpoint. And I think he has the mentality from a toughness standpoint in terms of the contact of the game, and also in terms of this guy's just not happy with today. This guy wants to be great. And I want someone like that. And I think he has the tools to be great. I think he has the mindset to be great. And I promise you, schematically, we're going to give him every chance to do that. And when that's the case, and you have a guy wired that way and you have a system that way, I mean, what can hold him back? And I mean, there's always injuries that, you can't hold into it. But Brandon is, you guys asked if he's the top guy. He was my favorite receiver I evaluated. There's no doubt in that. CeeDee Lamb was a hell of a player and can make a lot of plays. And so, I mean, I always keep it pretty real with you guys. And so that was a guy who was competition with him. But in terms of the receiver and just all the positions and developed, this guy was there from the first time we watched him.